Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. With the looming election coming, I decided to do this free tutoring lesson on civics so you know what you're voting for, why you're voting, and if the statistics are true, how little your vote will matter. I know, that is probably a little harsh, but let me explain. There are basically two reasons why I am doing this. The first reason is 4 out of 5 people will fail a civics test. So that means, statistically, if you believe you think you know how our government works, the odds are you don't. And why does that matter? Well, now we get into our second point, the definition of insanity, which states that doing the insanity is doing something, the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Now, why does that matter? Well, because we vote to change our government, and it doesn't seem to be helping a whole lot, which I'll get to more in more detail later. But let's just say that if you think that the federal is going to help you, you are sadly mistaken. But let's back up a little bit. Let's get into how our government works. Regardless of the size you are going with, whether it be federal, state, or local, our government is split into 3 branches. And from any of you who remember Civics 101, the 3 branches are legislative, judicial, and executive. Legislative job is to write the laws or make the laws. Generally, if a new law is either passed or removed, that is done by legislative, which we will get into how that is built when we discuss them in detail. Next is the judiciary. Their job is to interpret the law as written. Now, one thing that I have noticed is a lot of people tend to be confused on what the judicial does and what they're supposed to do. For instance, we hear a lot about the judiciary should be from the will of the people. But that doesn't make any sense because that's the legislative job. The judiciary should be away from the people, just simply interpreting the gray area of any law, because some laws can be confusing. They should not judiciarily decide to bring laws into existence, and we will get into that as well when we talk about judiciary. And the third branch of government is the executive branch. Their job is to enforce the law. Generally, they control the enforcement, and a lot of people seem to be confused on that too. We will discuss this again in more detail as we go, but when police brutality happens, a lot of people blame the feds. And in short, that's again shows ignorance because the feds control the military. The police is controlled by the local and state. Generally, if there's a police issue, it's a local issue. And trust me, we will get to that. But one thing at a time. Alright, everybody have the writing utensil and a notebook steady, because we're going to go through this. Alright, let us begin. First up, we're going to talk about the legislature branch. And again, their job is to write the laws and make the laws. Of all 3 branches, this is the only one where the will of the people directly matters. In the federal and state, they are split into 2 chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. In the feds, the House of Representatives the number is based on each individual's population. For instance, California has 53 before the census is taken. It has 53 House members because there's the most people. Wyoming has 1 House member because there's the fewest people. In states, the House, it works basically the same way as it's based on each county's population. The Senate, on the other hand, is built differently. The Senate is 2 members per state regardless of population. So California, being the most populous, gets 2, and Wyoming, being the least populous, gets 2 as well. And I know this is a hot button topic. I'm going to save what the Senate's role is at the very end. And in states, it's basically the same thing. Basically, one half of the state gets a Senate member, and the other half gets a Senate member. And how that works varies from state to state, since that's a state issue. Now, in local, it works a little differently. Generally, with locals, you get city councils, and they kind of act as both the Senate and the House, because while like Los Angeles or New York City could be big enough to split to have their own House chamber and Senate chamber, a lot of cities can't. For instance, Podunk, Kansas, there's not enough people there to warrant 2 chambers. So generally, you get 1 chamber, the city council, who can be very powerful. In fact, as we will discuss, more powerful than you could possibly imagine. I'm here all week. All right. And basically, this is when it comes to how these laws go, local trumps state, which trumps feds. I'm going to repeat that again. The local laws trump the state laws, which trump the federal laws. This is federalism 101. Now, a lot of people are a little confused by that, because it's like, well, how can that be? When the feds do something, doesn't it affect most? Like slavery, or even allowing gay marriage. Isn't all this federal stuff affect me? Yes. However, most of the time, if you're affected, it's from local. Because local trumps federal. I'll give you an example. In the 1960s, I can't remember the year, because I didn't write that down, the Civil Rights Act passed. And in essence, it's not this simple. No law is this simple. But in essence, it desegregated schools and other public areas, and in a way made blacks more equal than they've ever been. But did it? In St. Louis, which I can speak about since I lived there for a while, there is basically a split: East St. Louis and West St. Louis. In West St. Louis, the population, I think, is about 80% white, with a median income of $134,000. East St. Louis, on the other hand, is 99% black, with a median income of around $40,000. Now, I'm confused. If federal trumps local, how is this happening? Now, the St. Louis is not the only city. Pretty much every city has this kind of segregation problem. But St. Louis is just the worst example I could find. Or not necessarily the worst. I think there are some cities that are worse, but this is the most potent example. Very simple. Just remember this. If the Fed really controlled that much, that wouldn't happen. And it matters why you should care about your locals more than federals, because if you thought like Obama or whoever was going to fix it, he had 8 years to do it, he didn't, because that's not in his power. So in essence, that's a big reason why I want to do this, to explain to people who most don't know how this works. Worry about your local elections, because regardless of who wins the presidency, whether it be Trump or Biden, any problem you have will not be fixed by the feds. And that brings us to the judicial branch. Again, the judicial branch's job is to interpret the law as it is written. This is important because some laws are a little confusing and have a little gray area. Not to mention the gray area that will inevitably come from new concepts attributed to old laws. Like, for instance, how does the internet affect the First Amendment? So you need a judiciary to judge on how that's going to go. Now, when it comes to the judiciary, the highest court in the land is the Supreme Court. The ones below that are I'm not sure if they consider them federal or not, but are your districts and appellates. Then we go down to state and county courts. And how this goes is a case could be literally anything. If a case goes to a county court and they don't rule on it, they can move it up to state court. If they don't rule on it, they move it up to district courts. Generally, the district courts, most of the time, a case will be decided by district courts. If the court does decide on it, then it moves to the appellate court, who can overturn it if they see fit. And it can get a little confusing, but generally either it goes to Supreme Court if the district courts do not send it to the appellate, or the appellate decides to send it to the Supreme Court. And generally when it goes to the Supreme Court, that's the final word in the matter. Now, how are the courts filled? A lot of people will think, well, aren't they voted like anything else? No. In the Supreme Court, the president appoints a Supreme Court member, and the Senate votes to confirm this person. And it pretty much works the same way, or at least it can work the same way in a state courts. The governor will decide, and the I believe in state I live in at least, the governor decides, and the Congress as a whole decides to vote for them. When it comes to the district and appellate courts, the president also fills those. When it comes to county courts, those are voted on. And I know that because in everywhere I've gone, every state I've lived in Illinois, Missouri, California, and that's it. And in all states, we've had to vote on our judges. Now, you're probably wondering, why don't we vote on federal judges? Well, very simple. As we know, politicians are scumbags. And very often they're hypocritical and do whatever they want, basically. And you don't really want that in a judiciary. So you give them a lifetime job, so they are not affected by public opinion. So even if you piss people off, regardless of how you do your job, you will have your job, because your job is not to please people. And that's what I spoke about earlier. The judiciary should not be the will of the people, because the will of the people should be done by laws, not by judiciary. If you want something done and it's unconstitutional, sorry, you should not be able to do it, unless you pass an amendment. And that's not the topic for our discussion yet, but hopefully, if you guys like this and will come back, I will do another tutor seminar on the Constitution and how it runs. But we're not worried about it right now. Now, a lot of people seem to be confused by what the judiciary should be allowed to do, and are pretty hypocritical. Yes, I know there's a few of you here, when it comes to them basically passing laws. Well, let's clear the air on that. This is going to be uncomfortable with some people, but hypocrisy generally is. I'm going to say this, and I want you to listen. The creation of laws should not be carried out by the judiciary. I'm going to say that again. The creation of laws should not be carried out by the judiciary. Now, why do I say that? Because, one, when you do that, you allow so much corruption. And two, every single person who supports that is a hypocrite. I'll say that again. If you support the judiciary basically creating laws, you're a hypocrite. Because if the side that you are not with does it, you will be crying foul. I'll explain. Roe v. Wade, which is a big hot topic, was passed in 1973 by the judiciary. It acts as an amendment, but instead of being voted by 2/3 state and 3/4 of Congress, it was voted by 9 people. Now, you may be saying that's okay, but the Supreme Court in 2008 basically said that you are allowed to own a personal firearm for protection. And I know a lot of gun control advocates were livid. Now, why is that? It's because you like activism when it's on your side. I know a lot of people were not expecting to be challenged on your beliefs, but it has to be done. If you're upset by certain judiciary activisms, you are only upset because it goes against your worldview. You should not be giving the judiciary that much power, Because if you do, then you have hyperventilations over the appointments of Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and ACB. If people do not give the judiciary that much power and influence, this will not be an issue. Our Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death would be a tragedy, but will not be the end of the world as we know it. And I know a lot of people will be upset when they hear that, but it's true. Either you're for activism or you're not. Don't be a hypocrite, or at least admit that you want it done your way. And generally the response to that is, well, what about, what's right and what's not? And I can get to that when we get into the Constitution. But let's move on. The third branch we shall talk about, the third and final branch we shall talk about, is the executive branch. In the feds, this is the president is the highest in the land when it comes to the executive. And his or her job is to enforce the laws that are written. And that can really range from like the president has so many diverse jobs that I can spend all day here talking about what the president can do. But basically, to make this concept easier, the president controls the military. For instance, in the 1960s, when JFK sent the military to National Guard, I believe, which is part of the military in essence, to help desegregate schools, he was enforcing a law that technically was already in there, because the Civil Rights Act, I don't believe was all that necessary. It was basically guidelines, which again don't have to be followed because the local governments trump federal governments. But let's move on. When it comes to the underneath the president, we have the vice president, who's also executive, and we have a bunch of other ones like the Attorney General, the DOJ, his cabinet. The executive branch is big, and it's only gotten bigger. Technically, the departments, such as the Department of Education or Department of Homeland Security, are also executive. In the state, it basically mirrors the Fed. You have the governor, who is the head of the executive for a state, and then you have their version of the vice president. It can vary from state to state, and their cabinet. And in locals, you have mayors, and mayors and city councils will work a little differently together than the other two, but essentially that's how it is. The mayor is the head of the city, and again, from what I've seen, that can range. The cabinet can range from not state to state, but from city to city or country to county to county. Now, the president is and should be limited in his power. We call these checks and balances. Every branch should be checked and balanced by another branch to show that to prevent corruption. For instance, an executive order, often called EOs, are used to basically enforce a law that could take too long to do. For instance, I believe there was an EO done years ago to help military action because we were attacked and the Congress was taking too long to basically say yes, we need to counterattack. So an EO is used for that. Unfortunately, EOs have been used in recent years to basically turn the president into a legislator, and we get back into the whole hypocrisy thing, because I know that in 2000, I don't remember the year, but Obama wrote an EO to basically enact DACA, which is unconstitutional. It should have been passed by legislature, but it wasn't because Obama got impatient. So he decided to EO it. And that's where we get into Trump. A lot of people were getting hot on the button because he EO'd it out. Well, here's the thing about politics. How it goes in should be the way it comes out. If it was fine for Obama to EO it in, it's legally fine for Trump to EO it out. The only complaint you could have is a bias. You like DACA, so you want it out. And so you want it in. And you don't like somebody using the exact same thing that his party did to bring it out. And again, that goes for the judiciary. So again, the main, if you leave here with anything, it's know how our system works, realize how good our system is, and just be consistent. Because when you're not, then your complaints over the opposite party fall on deaf ears because they mean nothing. And that's kind of why we're so divisive right now, because no one knows how our government works. They just simply think it's the way I think it works, and therefore that is the truth. And it's simply not. Now, when it comes to how certain things work, there are certain hot button topics. There are certain hot button topics that are hard to discuss, but I'm going to discuss two big ones that have come in recent weeks or recent months. The first one is the Electoral College. And for those of you who are not sure what that is exactly, basically that is that each state has a certain number of Electoral College votes. It's based on how many House Representative members you have and Senate members you have. Every state will have at least 3 Electoral College votes. Wyoming having exactly 3 for the 2 senators and 1 representative. The most pre-2020 census is California at 55, 53 House members and 2 senators. And the Electoral College basically is if a president has the most votes in a certain state, they get those Electoral College votes. And whoever has more than half of Electoral College votes wins the presidency. If there's a tie, I believe either the vice president or the House decide the president. Then I don't remember. I think it's a House member. I think the House decides the presidency then. All right. Now, why is this important? Because a lot of people are like, well, isn't that undemocratic? Because as we saw in 2016. Couldn't the person who has the least votes or less votes win? And yes, in 2016 we saw that. Hillary won the popular vote by around 3 million, and Trump won the Electoral College by 60 Electoral College votes, something like that. So one week questioning, is it undemocratic? Yes, and that's the point. You see, democracies are dangerous because of this issue. Do we really want to leave the hands of the presidency in a nation where 80% don't even know how our government works? Didn't think so. But let me make a little more sense. There's 2 words I can say that'll make you hate democracy. George Floyd. I know, a lot of you look really confused right now. Well, what does George Floyd have to do with anything? Well, let me explain. Before I go into it, for anyone who don't know, in 2020, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, George Floyd was killed by a cop by having his neck knelt on for 9 minutes. He died of asphyxiation, if I can say it properly. And his murderer will likely get away with it. So what does George Floyd have to do with Electoral College? Well, in a democracy, the leaders of Minneapolis get into the feds much easier. Let's just say, if you look at Hillary Clinton's voting numbers, pretty much the only reason she won the popular vote is because of California. She won California by around 6 million. Now, imagine for a minute that California, LA specifically, but California has these same type of tendencies who want to make laws that kill innocents much easier. Well, it's much easier to get into the feds by direct democracy. Why? Well, in Electoral College, the states who see the stupidity of a bigger state can say, no, we don't want that. We're going to vote for this person who won't do that. And while the person who won't do that may lose the popular vote, people are saved because of this. In direct democracy, we get Hitler, your Hitlers and Stalins. I know that Hitler changed the way things went there, but it was a lot easier to do because of democracy. A lot of people may not like it, but we are safer with Electoral College because stupidity doesn't run rampant. And again, hold your snickers about the current president. I've heard them all. I get it, and I think some of them are funny. But the fact remains is that George Floyd was bad. I don't think within reason, Trump has done anything that bad. And the second hot button issue I want to talk about is the Senate. This generally doesn't come into play, but now people are starting to become upset with it because it's like it doesn't represent population. Again, that's the point. The idea of the constitutional republic, which we are, is that it's the will of the majority with the consent of the minority. Quite honestly, from a philosophical standpoint, if you support minority rights, you have no choice but to support the Senate. That is the only way to stay consistent. And what do I mean by that? Well, kind of similar to the EC. If somebody wants to pass something, you better have an overwhelming majority. For instance, I'm going to go hyperbolic here, but if you say you support Hitler's treatment of the Jews, all you need in democracy is 51% to agree with you. With a Senate, you need like 75% to agree with you. The Senate protects minorities. It was basically set up, the Senate was basically set up because if you think about it, America was the European Union before it was a thing. Because in essence, the United States of America, the United States, are in essence 50 individual countries that are united into one. So the Senate is not based on population, but based on the countryhood, if you will, of each state. That's why the Senate exists the way it does. Because it doesn't care about population, it cares about its countryhood, if you will. Wyoming has laws that are different from Missouri's, which are different from Minnesota's, which are different from West Virginia's, which are different from Texas, which are different from Louisiana, etc., etc., etc. Why would it be based on population if the laws are so different from state to state? Nothing will work like a glove. That's why you need a Senate to protect the minority from certain dangers. And while a lot of people may not like it, it does ensure that you can't just, convince, for lack of a better term, or fool people, for lack of a better term, in large populated areas to basically kneel on the neck of minority states who don't have much of a voice. And I know that seems a bit harsh, but that's the way it is. So again, if you support minority rights, you have to support the Senate. That's the only philosophical point. If you don't, then you're biased. There's no other way to put it. But I hope that this all makes sense to you. If you leave here today, regardless of how you feel, I hope that I got across to you that our system works a certain way, regardless of how you feel, why certain things don't change, even though by many standards they should, and why our system is the way it is, and how great it really is. If you ever wonder how great America is, just keep in mind, a big reason why a lot of Europeans can do what they do is because of America. Over 60% of NATO is paid by America itself. If tomorrow we stopped all that payment, just think about what happens. Someone has to protect them. If we aren't, who is? But that's all I wanted to discuss with all of you today. So thank you very much for coming. I hope I got you to think. And make sure you think about all of this when you go to vote. Vote local. And also, don't keep voting for the same thing, expecting different results. That is the definition of insanity. Thank you all for coming. Goodbye, and God bless. Hello. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you like my videos, please subscribe down below to be notified when I post, and click that bell to actually be notified when I post. If you have any suggestions for future role plays, as well as if you like the idea of me doing this type of thing for the Constitution, please let me know down below or shoot me an email. My address will be in the description below. And if you want to see updates to my uploads, as well as my cultural hot takes, please follow me on Twitter. The link will be in the description below. Until next time, thank you very much for watching, and God bless.